And a regular meeting is a meeting that is posted on the city's website at least 24 hours in advance. And we'll take care of that. Iris and Rush will help post the notice of the meeting and the agenda, and you folks don't need to worry about that at all. What we need to be cognizant and aware of is communications that happen outside of meetings. So if are email exchanges between one or two members, that's probably okay. As soon as we start sending an email to the entire group, that could be construed as a meeting. So just be aware of that. And we don't want to be taking action or holding a meeting or being perceived to hold a meeting in a way that the public can't have access to. And so if there's emails to the large group, the public can't access that email. So just be aware that we are subject. Yes, sir.
I have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
What if you want to share information? You're not really having a meeting, but you found a piece of, I don't know, something. You found a Harvard report and you want to share that with the group, right? Is that considered an open meeting? Is that considered an open meeting?
You can share. You can send information to the group. So if you find something that's of interest, you want to send it to the group, you can do that. Now we will. Iris and Rush will be sending out an email a group to this group tomorrow that allows us to share that type of information and store that information using a city tool through the Microsoft Teams format. So it's a group email that we will all have access to that gets sent to your private email addresses. But when you send it to that group, then that record is retained by the city. And so we'll have some more further instruction on that tomorrow. It's a pretty nice little tool that lets us share that information and sending it not to an individual member or all of your private email addresses, but then you send it to the city's broadband work group system. And Marty can maybe explain that better than I can, but that will help us make sure that the email exchanges that we need to do, or that if the public wants to send us an email, that we can use that common email address. And that email address is posted on the group's webpage today. So just in very, very broad terms, we are subject to Open Public Meetings Act. We take all of our actions, decisions, deliberations in the public session. We can share information, we can have side conversations, but the actions occur in these regular public meetings. Are there any questions that folks might have or concerns when it comes to the Open Public Meetings Act? When it comes to public records, all of our actions and deliberations are public records. So if I send you an email or you send me an email, as soon as it crosses my email server, that's a public record. If you as a private individual send an email to another individual, that's likely not subject to public records unless it's related to the business of the city. So if Stephen, if you send an email to Linda Fells about broadband, and then Linda Fells mentioned that's another point in a public meeting, that may be subject to public records. So just be cognizant and aware of that. A good rule of thumb that we have is if you don't want it on the front page of the Herald, don't say it, send it, or fax it, right? But and that's that just to be aware of that. And in any case, that's all I have to say about open public meetings. You've all seen the training. If you haven't watched that video, please get a chance to do that. I'll send you the link if you need to find that again. And we'll be about the people's business. Any questions about records or OPMA? Awesome. Good. Back to you, David. I think I got you on schedule again.
You bet you do. And actually, I'm going to pass it right back to you to talk about the purpose and objective of the council resolution.
Okay. Let me bring that up here. So from the city's website, we have resolution 2031, and you all have a chance to read this. And these are kind of the four main purposes that the council has assigned this group to dive into. It's to evaluate the possibility of municipal-owned broadband infrastructure as one way to further goals of greater availability, affordability, equitability, and quality of broadband across the community. And the community is the city of Bellingham. There are opportunities to partner with other agencies through the region, but our task is for the city of Bellingham when we refer to the community. It's to address policy considerations and financial cost and benefits. It's to assess existing conditions related to broadband access, equity, and affordability, as well as options and ways to use City of Bellingham fiber, our existing network, as it exists today, or may be expanded or improved to again enhance the access, equity, affordability of quality and broadband. And so this is kind of the real key point of this group is to assess what do we have in the City of Bellingham. Is it affordable? How do we define affordability? Can people get access to it? Is it equitable across demographics, across racial lines? Is it across neighborhoods? Is it across any sort of demographic that we might portray? Can we make it accessible to all? And then at some point to report those findings and give a recommendation to the city so that the city council can hold a public discussion on broadband infrastructure policy. And this is a distinction that we want to draw very clearly, is that this group does not set policy. This group is advisory to the council. It is the council that sets policy. However, the council has tasked us to advise them so that they can have that public discussion and eventually, if they so choose, to establish a new policy to move forward. So oftentimes with these advisory groups, the line gets a little blurred, and that's okay, between setting policy and discussing policy. But our clear mandate is not to set policy, it is to provide a recommendation to the council on what that policy could be.
Any questions on that for Eric? Yes, Stephen.
Eric, what kind of resources will this group have from the city staff, if any, or none at all?
Well, you have a tremendous resource in the city staff for whatever purpose you as a group decide you may want. In addition to city staff, you also have the benefit of the ex officio members from the port, the school district, the private operators who are in the community who have committed to help supporting this group. So I think the door is pretty wide open as to what resources you might want to draw onto. We have a little bit of money available, and probably the biggest resource that's going to come to bear is the consultant that will help this group do the legwork to do the assessment. So we're not expecting that you as the 9 members would go out and measure and count fiber strands or whether a system is affordable. That's not your task. Your task, I believe, is to assign us those responsibilities and to assign those responsibilities to a qualified, capable consultant, and then to assess that and say, are these the tools we need? Is this the information we need so we can make that recommendation to the council? So in terms of resources, we have a $100,000 budget to hire a consultant. If we use all of that funding, that's okay. If we use less than that, that's okay too. But in addition to those resources, we can draw on the ex officio members that are here, the city staff resources that are here. You are more than welcome to invite other members of the community, other professionals in the workspace. A couple of years ago, the city invited a gentleman from a group called the Institute for Self-Reliance. My brain just went dead, and I forget. Christopher Mitchell. Christopher Mitchell made a very nice presentation to the city council about municipal broadband and the benefits of public fiber and how you go about forming that process. This group is following his guidance on the next steps. So I think the door is pretty wide open in terms of resources and tools that you might want to draw on. We're here to help, but as we'll talk more later in the meeting, one of the first tools to bring to bear will be the consultant to help you do what you need to do, and let's form the RFP and let's get that on the street as quick as we can, and other things as we go past that. So
I would add too, Eric, that there are communities out there that are already doing this kind of work that we can also, through the wonders of the internet, we can bring them in without having to have them travel or anything. So if that's desired, that certainly can be part of the process as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, David. I certainly have talked at many times with the city of Anacortes staff, the city of Mount Vernon staff, staff from the Port of Skagit County and Skagit PUDs, who are also engaged in fiber extensions throughout their communities, staff from the city of Seattle, staff from the Department of Commerce, who are engaged in broadband efforts throughout the community, throughout the state of Washington. The State Department of Commerce has a mandate from the governor to extend broadband throughout the state of Washington, and they have tremendous resources to share as well. So there's a lot of resources we can draw on that don't cost any money, and certainly can bring that to bear as folks may want.
Including
Eric?
some of you who are very talented in this world as well. So yes, Melissa, go ahead.
I have a question, Eric. You talked about Christopher Mitchell giving a presentation to a group. Is that presentation available that we could find it and watch it?
It is available. It's on the city's website for Broadband Advisor for this group, and maybe I can just do a quick share on that. Where am I at here?
Is it already on the broadband website then?
Yeah. So let me just do a hit back button on my browser here. So the city has a dedicated website for this work group. And just a quick search, Broadband Advisory Work Group, City of Bellingham, even in Google will get you there. It defines our purpose, the requirements, our meeting minutes. It has resources, and it has every city council discussion and action that have occurred going back to 2017. So I want to say that it was November 2017 was that agenda topic, and simply clicking on that link will take you to the video of that meeting. And you'll be able to watch Mr. Mitchell's presentation from November of 2017.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, all of our meetings will be posted here. All of our resources will be added to this website. This will be, publicly available to the community and a repository for information that we're gathering.
Excellent.
Eric, I have one more question, please. Will the ex officio members be part of the mail list for this group or not?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Eric.
You'd think I'd figure out how to do that after a year. I think that decision is up to you folks. This is your work group. They're there to support that. I don't have an opinion either way.
If the group decides that we want to have a separate email list just for the ex officio members,
Right.
can
Yeah,
we
I
do
think
that?
we should be able to have two.
Let me talk to Marty about that. We can explore that as a possibility.
Great.
Any other questions for Eric before we move on?
Yeah, Eric, I have a question specifically about the scope of this group as defined in the resolution that formed the work group. Can you speak to the limitations of the scope based on what's actually in section 3 of the resolution that formed the group? I noticed that most of the bullet points in that scope of work for the group specifically pertain to working with the consultant, putting together the RFP, selecting the consultant. In some ways, it seems a little limiting as far as what the group itself is able to do without the consultant. And I'm wondering what kind of flexibility we have to try to maybe save money by supplementing some of the consultant's work with other work that's already been done, and B, maybe doing some of that research amongst ourselves.
That's a great question. Let me pause for a moment to think about that a little bit. Well, let me answer the question in a different way. So in that section 3, and let me do another screen share here. I apologize for just we're all seeing the same thing. So here in section 3 of the work group, and I hope you can see that, it calls about assisting with the development of the request for proposals. And I think when it says assist, that's basically you folks help put that together. We as staff will put it into the format and come up with the standard format and language for that. And again, with the assist with the development, we're really looking to this group to say this is the scope of the work for the consultant to undertake. Provided it provides a caveat that if there's sufficient funds in the authorized budget. So we only have $100,000. That doesn't last very long. It goes out, that gets spent very quickly.
And that's also shared with the facilitator, right, per 3F?
In this case, no. I pulled that from a different source. So the 100,000 is available for the consultant on this effort.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So I mean the bullet points here, this came from an early draft of a scope of work that the council discussed for that consultant prior to the formation of this work group, and it was just molded into this into the resolution here. A lot of this section of the work group is really geared towards getting that contractor underway.
Mhm.
So it says advise in the selection of a qualified consultant. And this is a bit of a tricky part here because the administration and selection of a consultant and the execution of that contract is a staff responsibility. So we will take care of that side of it when we say this is the contract execution, but this group gets to weigh into as to who we hire. But the administration of the contract falls onto my desk. So that's kind of that's a limitation, right? This group is not the administrator of the contract. I'm the administrator of the contract, but you're using the contract and advising and asking for the contractor to produce something. But it's my job to ensure that they do their work and get it done on time.
So Eric, is it possible that when you do the interviews or review the applications, the response to RFP, that some members of the group can help with that process?
Yes, I think that would be expected, that a small subset of this group could be involved in that process. Not a quorum, but a small subset. Probably the more salient point is in this paragraph C as to what the scope of work as to the council wants this committee to look into. And broadband internet access has a very broad definition. It can mean lots of things to lots of folks. The intent here is that the focus is on is here, right, and not necessarily getting into other forms or other types of services that might be an option. So as I understand this section of the resolution, we're not going to consider to great extent how a 5G or a 4G or a 3G LTE system might provide services, or how satellite services might provide broadband. It's to focus on how broadband and specifically fiber optic networks can be used to meet the city's goals for accessibility, affordability, and equity. So in terms of limitations of scope, I think this is probably the limitation of what are we looking at, where we're looking at one certain type of technology when it comes to fiber optics and not other technologies that could be used to provide that type of service. Probably the bigger point is the purpose we're trying to achieve, using the tools the council wants us to use, not necessarily, and keeping within the lane of the things they've asked us to look at, and not get into another element that is ancillary related. If that helps, and maybe I'm not answering the question, Maximilian, but that's what I've got on top of my head here.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, then I appreciate you trying to explain. Is there, let's say that we start the conversation and we realize that there are certain things that we'd like to explore that would work towards the overall objectives of the group that we're kind of limited from pursuing based on this document. Is there a way that we can go to the council and request that our scope be expanded a little bit or something like that? Is this mutable, I guess is the question.
The answer is yes to both, right? So we can do some interpretation of what the resolution says, and we can get some feedback from the council. We can also go back to council and say, hey, we want to look at this element, and here's what we want to look at, right?
Okay.
My advice is to keep things at a pretty high level, right? Let's not get into the minutia of details and go down a rabbit hole of, you know, what's the do you schedule 40 or schedule 80 PVC pipe for conduit? Let's avoid those kind of conversations. Let's keep it at a high level where we can, and not get into if that helps. But we can always go back to council and say, council, we need more time. We want to broaden the scope. We want to narrow the scope. We want to stay focused on these things. Let's focus on the end result, which is an advice and recommendation to the council to establish a policy. And often is the case that we get to the end of the process and we say, here's our recommendation, but we think that the city should look at something more, or look in greater detail in this area. So We're not going to solve all of the issues in the next year, but we can do what we can based on what the council's asked us to do.
Can I try to summarize this and clarify my understanding? So what we're trying to do is write a request for proposal, recommend a policy recommendation relating to a request for proposal, such as like what the scope of work, what the geographic area, all these questions specifically relating to fiber. We make a recommendation to the city council on what the RFP needs, and then actually completely writing that RFP and distributing it and, getting the consultant to carry through those studies is the city staff, right?
Yes, but maybe a little more simple than that. So we don't have to go to council until we're done with the work. So this meeting is an organizational meeting.
Okay.
So we're going to get ourselves organized today. My recommendation is that the next meeting is that we dive quickly into the idea of what a scope of work would be for a consultant to help this group gather information.
Okay. So
so this group, go ahead.
We're doing the RFP and going with that to city council later on.
No.
So
we're deciding the terms of the RFP, getting the other person to do it. And then, so city council just comes in much later.
They come in at the very end.
Got it.
This group produces the scope. I put it into the RFP format. I send it out the door and get the consultants to respond. I come back to this group and say, here's the list of people that might be hired.
Okay.
We hire that consultant. That consultant then starts to work with you folks. The work gets completed. In the meantime, you're doing other things to gather information and address topics and have speakers and produce that knowledge base from which we can make a decision. And then at the end of the process, the consultant here said, here's the report. Here's our recommendations as a consultant to this committee. This committee compiles all that information and boils it down to a half-page council agenda bill saying, here's our report. We recommend you do X, Y, or Z and move forward. So we meet, we formulate the scope of work, we produce the RFP, we hire the consultant, and then there's roles, responsibilities. The work gets done. The consultant produces the report. This committee assesses the report and then produces a recommendation to the city council.
Eric, one more question that I have on collaboration. I know that we're in a box. Our box is the city of Bellingham, but we have the PUD and the port also working, I guess, in parallel, or I guess that's the word I want to look at is parallel. Now, are we going to be stepping on each other's toes through this process? And how do we avoid that politically and literally?
The dance floor is large and we're all dancing pretty well. I'm not a very good dancer, so I step on a lot of people's toes.
That's been my MO.
But the reality is that when it comes to fiber networks or municipal networks or just infrastructure in general, the lines and the pipes and the wires could care less about political boundaries. So the city and the school district and the port and to some extent the PUD and the county are inexorably intertwined with each other when it comes to the infrastructure. And there is a strong connection between the infrastructure that we have and the infrastructure that the port and the PUD are extending into the county. But there is a clear distinction from political entities in terms of policy and funding. And so this group's focus needs to be with the city of Bellingham, recognizing that there's a need and a benefit of working with those other agencies, like we do with the school district and the port, to making sure that we're not duplicating effort. Now, this group is not providing a recommendation of policy to the PUD or to the port or to the county. It's to the city council. So we as a group are advisory to the city council. The city council is considering and looking at and having discussions about how do we address that overall interaction policy discussions with the other entities. And they may give us some further direction on that in the near future. They may take a different tack and do something separate from that. So I think that's kind of a question that is still out there. But our
Yeah,
specific,
because it would be beneficial for the whole community as a whole to have this all integrated, so it's basically all very similar, as opposed to City of Bellingham has one thing, PUD has another, the port has another. It certainly would make sense, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially with the objectives.
absolutely. And one way to get to that point would be to invite our ex officio members from the PUD to come and share with this group what the PUD is currently doing. I think it'd be a very appropriate way to help address some of those questions.
Yeah,
Likewise with the port. Gina Stark from the
especially
port
Gina
could-
Stark. Yeah.
Yep, could talk about what the port is doing, and we could be aware of that. And so, an avenue to say, here's what's happening in the community, here's what's happening with private providers, here's what's happening with public providers, and here's a role that the city could play without duplicating effort.
All right, so Eric, I believe you got through most of your purpose and objective and organizational roles there. Does anybody have any further questions before I ask for some scheduling ideas? All right, well, let's move on then. So let's do a quick check on scheduling meetings. Our goal is to have this process completed within a year. That would mean meeting monthly would probably be typical. If that's the case, then we need to find a consistent day that works for everybody. Hope is that you'll be able to make most of the meetings, and that's my experience, is that these groups, typically everybody makes most of the meetings. So I would like to suggest either a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, one of the first two of the month, first 2 weeks of the month. So does anybody have a consistent conflict on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night in the first 2 weeks of the month? Linda, yeah?
And just as long as we do this time, 6 to 7:30, then I'm fine for Tuesdays.
Okay,
But otherwise, Wednesday doesn't matter.
Max?
David, yeah, can I speak to the length? I have really substantial concerns that given the scope of this group and what we're trying to achieve, especially early on, that an hour and a half is woefully insufficient for what we're trying to accomplish. I understand that none of us are compensated for this work, and so every hour that we donate is precious time. But in the interest of actually accomplishing what we're set out to accomplish, I would like to put the idea out there that we may consider extending the duration of our meetings.
Max, I have a similar anxiety about what you just brought up. If we take an hour and a half and we do that 12 times, that's only 18 hours. I happen to think that's way too short a time for what the scope of work has for us, and for the amount of investigation and thought process and coming up with 18 hours. I don't think that's enough.
Right, and education as well. I mean, the goal of this group was to be diverse, both, it's technically as well. And so we have some members of the group who may not be as familiar with all the various options for broadband. And so I think there's, several hours we're going to spend just educating the members of this group to get them to the point where they're able to have an intelligent discussion about the various options. I hope no one takes offense to that about that idea, but I think we all could, all of us probably have a lot to learn. And so in order to do that, we're going to need more time.
I was just wondering why we're just meeting once a month, especially at the beginning. I would think minimum twice a month, at least for the first few months, to get the RFP done and get the consultant hired. Maybe after that, we could go to once a month, but otherwise I can't see how we're going to get work done very quickly.
So I guess the question is, does anyone object to the idea of trying to increase the frequency or duration of our meetings, at least initially? So it sounds like we're in a.
Can I see a thumbs up if it's okay? Okay, so let me just suggest one thing. So I do a lot of Zoom meetings with groups. So your effectiveness in that last 30 minutes is going to be questionable at this time of the night. But I would suggest we shoot for agendas that somewhere are between an hour and a half and 2 hours. If we need a little extra time, or if the meeting rolls on a little longer because the conversation's good, I think that's fine. If you want to increase the frequency of the meetings, that's fine as well too. I can handle that. I just know that most of you are working still, and you've had long days, and sitting on your bum for 2 hours and trying to concentrate on a little square on your monitor can be pretty challenging this time of night. So I want to respect your energy and everything that way too. So
David, this is
yeah,
Melissa, and
what's
I
up?
would agree. This is Melissa, and I would agree with that. I think we should increase the frequencies if we need more time, because I think you end up rabbit holing a lot in meetings when you have too long of meetings. And if we could go back and do self-study and try to figure out some things, and then have a second meeting in that month if we need it, I would be in favor of 2 meetings a month versus 4 hours or 3 hours.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Melissa. I think you're right, David, that you do get exhausted 8 o'clock at night. Nobody wants to be here after, working all day or whatever people are doing. I happen to agree with Melissa, and I think Max and Linda, to have more frequent meetings. And I would think two a month would be fine. I don't know what anybody else would think.
So if we,
This is RB. I agree with the group. Also, too, Wednesdays are kind of tough for me. So if the group can do Tuesdays, that would be great.
so what if we did the first and the third Tuesdays for the next 2 months? And then we see where we are after that. Does that work for everybody? Oh, I see lots of thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, we've got a decision. So so we are on the first, so we'll be on 14 days. So we're on the 16th. Does that sound right? Will be the next one. I don't have a calendar in front of me. So we'll shoot for the first and third Tuesdays of each month for February and March. And then as we get into March, we'll see how we're doing, how we're tracking on work and